everyone, welcome back. So this time we're switching gears a bit, taking a deep dive into something a little different. Instead of research papers and data, we're going to be breaking down a recent SNL cold open, that campaign rally sketch, the one with Kamala Harris.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the one where she's going head to head with, well, someone who always keeps things lively.
Right, yeah.
And you might be thinking, SNL, what's so deep about that? But trust us, there's a lot to unpack here. Especially in an election year, satire can be surprisingly revealing.
Yeah, totally agree. Political satire, especially on a platform like SNL, it's like this funhouse mirror. It distorts things, exaggerates reality, but in a way that forces us to kind of confront these underlying truths about how we see our leaders and even ourselves.
Exactly. And this sketch, I think, does a really clever job of that. It starts off seemingly normal, like a typical campaign rally, all the energy, the excitement, but it's for Kamala Harris, played, of course, by the amazing Maya Rudolph.
Right.
And right away, boom, they hit us with this line. My campaign is like that Sabrina Carpenter song, Espresso. The lyrics are vague, but the vibe slaps. What do you think of that?
Okay, so that right there is a perfect example of what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
It's funny because it plays on this pre-existing narrative, this idea that's been circulating that Harris, she maybe lacks a really clear, well-defined message.
Right.
And SNL takes that perception, that grain of truth maybe, and just filters it through this comedic lens.
Yeah, it's so smart how they do that. And then there's that bit with Harris carrying a literal shade button, like a nod to her reputation for being tough, but delivered in this playful way. I laughed, but then I also thought, does that make her seem more relatable, or does it just reinforce that image of her being, a little hardened? What do you think?
See, that is such a good question because it really highlights this tightrope that women in positions of power often have to walk,
For sure.
The sketch seems to be playing with this whole fun aunt persona for Harris. Like on the surface, it's lighthearted, but it also hints at these deeper questions about how women in politics, they're expected to balance authority with relatability.
Right. And it's really incredible how much they pack into those first few minutes. But then we get introduced to the supporting players, and things get even more interesting when Tim Walz walks out as the VP candidate, played by none other than Jim Gaffigan.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that casting choice alone, it felt like a statement.
Yeah, the juxtaposition is it's brilliant. Gaffigan with his, like everyman, almost self-deprecating humor, standing next to Rudolph's like more dynamic Harris.
Totally.
It's like a visual commentary on their public personas, even before they even say a word.
Exactly, and they really lean into it. Walls is stumbling out in this way too big suit, talking about like, buddy, big dad energy, and deals on leaf blowers. It's definitely playing on those Midwestern stereotypes. But then we have Doug Emhoff, played by Andy Samberg. And there, it feels like they kind of flipped the script a little bit.
Yes, totally, because Samberg's Emhoff, he's portrayed as this supportive, almost endearing husband, like a dad who's a little spoon, which feels very deliberate.
Yeah.
It subverts those traditional ideas of masculinity, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's like this subtle but really striking commentary on how these roles, these gender roles, are evolving even, or maybe even especially in the world of politics.
Yeah, it's definitely a different vibe, that's for sure. Especially compared to how the sketch kind of shifts gears in the next part.
You're right. It's like a complete 180. Suddenly, we're at Trump's rally. And the energy is, well, let's just say it's a far cry from Harris's.
Right. We see James Austin Johnson, as Trump, practically begging people to stay while he goes on this whole rant. And it's almost like hard to watch, but also you can't look away.
That's the thing about satire, right? It takes these uncomfortable truths of these kind of cringe-worthy moments, and it somehow makes them not just, watchable, but actually makes you think about them.
Totally.
Like that near-empty room at Trump's rally, especially compared to all the energy at Harris's event, that feels very intentional. Like it's reflecting this perception, whether it's accurate or not, of where they stand, their ability to draw a crowd, to get people fired up.
Yeah. And the things he's saying, too, I mean, they're eating the dogs, they're doing freak-offs with the dogs, and they're making the geese watch. It's so out there, so nonsensical. You almost can't believe it's coming from, a former president.
I know, right? So where do they even come up with this stuff?
Yeah.
But that's what SNL does so well, right? They take Trump's own words, his very particular way of talking, and they just dial it up. They push it to this point of absurdity where it's almost like a caricature.
Yeah.
And in doing that, they're not just going for laughs, it's deeper than that.
Yeah.
They're holding up a mirror to that kind of rhetoric, that tendency towards like exaggeration and these outlandish claims. And it makes you wonder, what are we supposed to take away from this? Are we laughing at it? Are we horrified by it? Or is it both?
That's a good question, for sure. And it's not just the candidates themselves either. The sketch goes after their running mates, too, which adds this whole other layer to the satire.
Totally.
Yeah.
You've got Bowen Yang playing J.D. Vance, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting to watch how they portray him. He's awkward. He seems unsure of himself. He even calls himself a creep at one point.
Right, right.
Which, on the surface, it's played for laughs, but it also feels very deliberate. Like they're tapping into some of the real-world criticism of Vance. Those questions about, whether he's qualified, whether he could actually win. And by kind of leaning into those perceptions, SNL is subtly, inviting us to think critically about these candidates, to look beyond just the surface level.
Yeah, totally.
And then on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have Dana Carvey back as Joe Biden at the Harris rally. And I mean, this Biden, he's a total caricature.
Right.
Like completely out of, forgetting that he's not president anymore.
Right.
But the crowd loves him. They eat it up. And it's such a stark contrast to how they portray Vance. What do you make of that?
It really is wild to see them side by side like that. You've got Vance, who comes off as, well, a bit awkward, a little unsure of himself. And then there's Biden, who, even when he's being totally caricatured, still has this, comforting, familiar vibe. Makes you wonder if maybe there's some nostalgia for the Biden years at play, especially compared to all the chaos of,
And that's what's so fascinating about satire.
Mm-hmm.
It has this way of revealing these subconscious feelings, things we might not even realize we're thinking.
Yeah.
The sketch definitely plays on that contrast, making us think about not just the candidates themselves, but also the different vibes they give off, their whole approach to leadership.
Yeah, totally. It's like they're holding up this fun house mirror to the whole political scene, and it's both hilarious and kind of terrifying at the same time.
It really is.
You're trying to find the humor in it all, but then you're also forced to confront these realities, and it's like, whoa. Do you think they managed to strike a good balance, between the humor and the more serious stuff?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, I think it's up to each person watching to decide for themselves. Does good political satire, does it need to be balanced? Or can it, even should it, embrace its power to point out hypocrisy, absurdity, even if it means kind of picking a side? It's a tough one. No easy answers there. Right.
But
it's definitely something to be thinking about as we navigate this whole election season, right? As we come across different forms of political commentary, whether it's on SNL or the news or even just in our own conversations.
It's a good reminder that even something as seemingly lighthearted as a late-night comedy sketch can really make you think about the political landscape in a different way.
Absolutely.
So yeah, next time you find yourself laughing along to some satirical take on the news, take a second to think about what's going on beneath the surface. What are they really trying to say? What does it make you think about?
Totally agree. It's all about being engaged.
Exactly. Well, on that note, this has been a fascinating deep dive, and looks like we're out of time for today. But as always, keep those brains buzzing, and we'll catch you next time.